On December 26, 1973, the Exorcist film opened, starring Ellen Burstyn, Jason Miller, and Linda Blair. And perhaps you didn't know that the story was based on real events. The main character had been changed from a boy, 13-year-old Ronald Hunkeler, to the female protagonist, played by Linda Blair. During the film, many of the cast and crew had bizarre accidents, and there were numerous delays with shooting scenes. Some cast members were injured, and some died, which led many to believe the film was cursed. While it had mixed reviews, long lines of moviegoers would wait outside in the cold to get tickets to the sold-out show. Moviegoers were terrified and traumatized by the depictions of evil on the screen. Even so, the two priests who were portrayed in the film confessed that the scenes in the film were nowhere near as terrifying as the actual events. At that time, evangelist Billy Graham urged people not to see it, and publicly declared, "There is a power of evil in the film, in the fabric of the film itself." He believed that just watching it was an open invitation to demonic possession, and he just may have been onto something.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So we're bringing this episode to you today. We actually recorded this on the same day that we recorded Darlene's episode last week about the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
We actually both got some of our information from the book by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard called Killing the Witches. And so a lot of our stories will they'll have a little bit of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
But we felt like it really goes well with this whole month of October.
Yes.
So with that said, let's just jump on into this.
All right.
Have you ever seen The Exorcist?
I have not seen, no, I haven't seen the movie.
Okay, and I actually haven't either.
Okay.
I have not seen it all the way through, partly because it came out when I was really, really young.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, sometimes they'll play it on TV, and I would catch snippets here and there.
Right.
And of course, with it being such a cultural, iconic film, we've all heard about it or seen spoofs of it or referred to.
Yeah.
So did you know that it was based on real events?
I did.
Okay. Well, I did not until
Okay.
I read that book
Yes.
from Bill O'Reilly. With the movie, as Hollywood does, there are elements of the movie that they fabricate or change and stuff like that. But the story that I'm going to share with you is actually the true story of what happened to Ronald Hunkeler. That was the basis for the movie,
Okay.
which may even be scarier than the movie.
Oof, okay.
The Hunkeler family consisted of Ed and Odell Hunkeler and their only son, Ronald. They lived in a 2-story house located at 40th Avenue in Cottage City, Maryland. And this was at the beginning of 1949.
Okay.
Now, Cottage City is only about 6 miles from Washington, D.C. So that's the area that we're talking about. Now, Ronald Hunkeler, he was a small kid, 13 years old. He was only about 95 pounds. And he was in the 8th grade at Bladensburg Junior High.
Okay.
And he didn't have many friends. And being an only child, he was a little bit lonely.
Yeah.
But there was one person that he just loved to spend time with, and that was his Aunt Tilly. But she lived in St. Louis, and so he didn't see her all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But she would visit Ronald and his parents as often as she could. And she had recently taught Ronald how to commune with the dead using a Ouija board.
Oh, gosh.
Now, we touched on that a little bit in your episode.
Yes.
I don't know right now if you'll have edited any of that out.
Okay.
But my question for you was, did you ever play with a Ouija board when you were younger?
I did.
Okay. And is your mama hearing that for the first time?
Yeah, I think she knows. I only did it briefly, over about a couple of weeks period when I was about 16 or 17.
Okay. I never did. My mama would have killed me.
Oh, mine would have too if she would have known.
Yeah. So I never did play with one. But Ronald and his Aunt Tilly were using one of these to try to summon the dead.
Okay.
So on the evening of January 15th, 1949, Ronald's parents were out for the evening, and he was home with his grandmother, who lived with the family. And as Ronald was getting ready for bed, he heard the sound of dripping water. And it got louder. Soon, that sound was loud enough that he and his grandmother thought there must be a leak upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
So they go and search to see if they can find where that's coming from. And they eventually trace the sound to an upstairs bedroom. But they go in and they're checking things out, and they couldn't really find a leak anywhere. It was just super strange.
Mm-hmm.
But suddenly, a framed picture of Jesus on the wall began to shake and bang against the wall. And then they heard a scratching noise from under the bed.
Oh, heck no.
I know. Creepy. Ronald peered under the bed, which I think for a 13-year-old is really brave.
Yes.
And he didn't see anything. I mean, the sound's louder under there, but he sees nothing. I mean, just totally creepy. Eventually, the dripping, the scratching, the shaking pictures, all of that stopped just as suddenly as it had started. And of course, it left him a little bit unsettled.
Yeah.
Well, the very next night, strange sounds started back up again. This time, Ronald's parents were home, and Ed, his father, he called an exterminator, thinking there's some kind of rodents on the wall.
Not just hit the kid hearing it.
No.
Okay.
When they investigated things, no rodents were found. So they put down some rat poison, and just in case. But it had no effect. The next night, they're still hearing that scratching noise. For a solid week, that sound continues every night, and it's only in the evenings from around 7 to midnight. The Hunkeler family, they hoped if they ignored it, it would just go away.
Right.
Kind of like I'm doing right now with my check engine light in my van. But we know that seldom works.
Right.
But for them, things finally did settle down for a while until they got word that Aunt Tilly had died unexpectedly out in St. Louis.
Oh.
Well, her death was kind of hard on Ronald. Again, he was kind of close to her. And he had spent a lot of time with her, and he shared her fascination with the afterlife.
Mm-hmm.
So now that she has passed away, he decides he's going to try to communicate with her just like she had taught him. He hadn't really had a chance to say goodbye because it was a sudden death. And so he's thinking maybe he can commune with her and tell her goodbye.
Right.
And his parents, they didn't think anything of it. They thought it was just a harmless game. But every day after school, Ronald was trying to summon Tilly's spirit through that Ouija board and seances.
Oh, gosh.
Now, I will say, even though I never played with the Ouija board, we used to have seances. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we would go out and sit in the middle of the road. We lived in a little neighborhood. We had a little street that wasn't real high traffic or anything like that. We would sit in the middle of the road with a candle and play around with a seance. But my mama, if she had known that, she would have beat her butt.
Oh, yeah.
So it's around this time that Ronald's desk at school begins moving on its own, sliding across the floor, hitting students. So a lot of people are seeing this. And the teachers, they accuse Ronald of pushing it with his feet and doing this. But he insists, I'm not doing this. I can't control it. But the teachers are kind of getting tired of this behavior.
Right.
More and more weird and creepy things are also going on at home. He begins to hear sounds as if someone is walking around upstairs. So after about a week, he tells his mom and his grandmother about the noises he's hearing. And so they decide they're going to go up there when he goes to bed and lay up there with him and see if they hear it too and if they can figure out what it is. So one night, the two women, they go to bed when he goes to bed, and they lay in the dark beside him to, just kind of verify, is he really having this happen, or is he just making stuff up? And they listen, and it's not long before they also hear those footsteps. So his mother calls out, "Is that you, Tilly? If it is, knock 4 times." And then all 3 of them hear 4 slow knocks on the door.
Gosh.
And then they are pushed down on the bed by some presence, and they cannot get up.
Mm-mm.
The bed begins to shake violently. The quilt is thrown off of them and on the floor, and they can't do anything. They are literally powerless and understandably terrified.
Oh, yeah.
These weird sounds continue for the next 3 weeks. And now it's no longer just happening at night. They got crazy stuff happening in the daytime as well. Books and shoes fly across the room. Furniture levitates with Ronald in it. Things crash against the wall and break. And it's gotten so disruptive that he actually can no longer attend school either.
That ain't Aunt Tilly.
No, it's not. So, desperate, they seek out a psychiatrist for Ronald, and he suggests, he's just a high-strung boy. I guess he still thinks Ronald is doing all this, and his parents just are naive to believe him. But the strange occurrences continue and intensify. Ronald now starts screaming during these episodes, using hateful words, cursing, waking the family up at night. And one time they checked on him, and when they did go in his room, his dresser flies across the room and blocks the door, blocking him in. And Ronald's barely even sleeping now.
I would have moved.
Yeah, well, they did. And I will tell you that here in just a few minutes. They do get to that point.
And left him there, too.
But that's where they went wrong. They didn't do that. This has taken a toll on Ronald. He starts, he's getting these dark circles under his eyes from not sleeping. He's constantly worried. He walks around muttering to nobody in particular, or possibly to somebody they can't see. They're just really at a loss. What do we do? Is this a mental illness? What is this? They reach out to their minister, Luther Schultz, at St. Stephen's Lutheran Evangelical Church. He's skeptical.
Right.
But he does visit them at their home, and sure enough, he too witnesses some of these crazy things going on that he was so skeptical about. But he's still not sure, okay, maybe this kid's just pranking us and setting this stuff up. So he prays for Ronald, but that's really all he knows to do.
Right.
Okay, so the Lutherans, they don't typically believe in demon possession like the Catholic Church does.
Uh-huh.
So Reverend Schultz, he's not really trained in any sort of thing like that.
Yeah.
But he does make another offer. He says, okay, maybe Ronald can come spend the night at my home, because he's thinking, well, if these are pranks, he won't be able to duplicate them at my house.
Okay. Smart. Yeah.
Ronald comes to his house for the night. That night, when they turn in, sure enough, some of these odd things start happening. The shaken bed, and Ronald is being thrown all over the room. And the Reverend thinks he's throwing himself all over, and he's yelling at him to stop. But Ronald replies, I can't. So the Reverend, being spooked now, he believes what Ronald's parents have been trying to convince him of the whole time. But he's like, well, I don't know how to help these people. So he refers them to a Catholic priest, stating that, they're really the ones who know about these kinds of things. They go to see Father Hughes at St. James Catholic Church. And he's actually not well versed in exorcisms either, because he's never actually witnessed anything like this. But he does do the only thing he knows how to do, and that is he sends the family home with holy water and a blessed candle for protection. And it's not long before Ronald's mother contacts him and tells him that those things aren't working. She said she had sprinkled the holy water in every room and lit the candle just like he told her. Instead of stopping or slowing down that activity, the glass bottle was thrown to the floor, and the candle flames had ignited and shooting flames up.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Yeah. And so, nothing has deterred this. And so they invite Father Hughes over to their house so he can see for himself what's taken place. And when he gets there, he finds Ronald in a trance-like state. But the boy looks at him, and he says something in Latin.
I
know. That's good. That is creepy. It is creepy. Now, the priest, they hold mass in Latin.
Yes.
So he understands what Ronald is saying, even though the parents probably do not. And the translation is, O priest of Christ, you know that I am the devil. Why do you keep bothering me? That is legit scary.
That gives me chills.
I know. By this point, rumor has spread that the Hunkeler home is haunted. I mean, it doesn't go unnoticed that the priests are coming. They're having to call the cops sometimes because
apparently
of stuff.
Noises.
Yeah. Finally, by this point, things are so bad that Ronald had to be admitted to Georgetown University Hospital, where he is evaluated by a psychiatrist. Even there, which is a Catholic hospital, nurses who are nuns, even there, the eerie and dangerous activity just continues. Ronald at times even speaks in Aramaic.
Oh, my goodness.
And that language is antique. It's not even known. There's no way he knew that in Aramaic language.
Sure.
And it's not like he could have Googled any of these phrases. So it's during one of Father Hughes's visits to Ronald at the hospital that a tipping point comes. Father Hughes tries to pray over Ronald. Here's what he says. I cast thee out, thou unclean spirit, along with the least encroachment of the wicked enemy, and every phantom and diabolical legion. And when he does this, Ronald goes ballistic. He breaks his restraints, because at that point at the hospital he was restrained, and he attacks the priest using a bed spring, and he slashes him down the forearm with one of those springs. Father Hughes runs from the room. Eventually, when he goes to get medical treatment, it takes over 100 stitches to sew up his arm.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. And I imagine he probably needed a tetanus shot, too, with that bed spring.
So that was no small little cut.
No. Now, prior to this, Father Hughes had been like young, healthy, attractive man.
Sure.
Probably not what we always think of when we think of a priest. But even his parishioners said that he changed almost overnight after that. His hair turned white. Like he got old overnight. Previously, his hair had been dark. And the poor guy ended up having a nervous breakdown and having to be put on an indefinite leave of absence from the church. And all of that stuff I just told you was chronicled in newspaper articles in 1949.
That is insane.
Ronald is sent home from the hospital with no diagnosis and no help. And for 9 more weeks, he endures unending torture. Finally, the Hunkeler family decide to leave their home and go stay near relatives in St. Louis. So maybe the problem's with the house, and they think if they can get out of the house, maybe that will help.
Yeah.
Also, they were helpful that they might could get help in the form of a group of Jesuits.
Jesuits, okay.
I didn't say it right. Jesuits. That's like a Catholic. You probably know what that is. But in case our listeners don't know, it's a Catholic order of clerics that are known as, that means like the Society of Jesus. Once they arrive in St. Louis, Ronald's battle, they thought it would help. That doesn't help either. Continues to get more intense by the day. So his mother talks about enrolling him in school, and the word no appears scrawled on his wrist. Well, Ronald has a female cousin that attends the University of St. Louis, and that's also a Catholic organization. And so she asked a priest there for assistance. This priest is Father Raymond Bishop. So he comes to visit Ronald. During that visit, a bottle of holy water is thrown from a table. Furniture is moved around the room by unseen forces. Father Raymond Bishop, he enlists the aid of Father Bodern, who's also a Jesuit scholar. So they have to do this right. And one important thing they have to be sure of is that priests, they don't want to confuse psychotic behavior with that of demon possession.
Right.
So they don't just go all willy-nilly and like, oh, we're going to have an exorcism.
Yeah.
Certain signs have to be observed in the patient, like supernatural strength, scratches on the body, speaking in a foreign language, and rooms becoming suddenly cold. And Ronald's condition has been accompanied by every one of those signs. Both men agree that it is time for an exorcism, that it is a demon possession. And they do follow the Catholic standard, so they have to seek permission from higher up to read the Roman ritual over Ronald. They get that permission.
Okay.
So the process begins on March 16th. As the 2 priests stand beside Ronald's bed, Father Bodern, who actually has been in the order since he was 17 years old, and he is like a very top scholar in this society, he knows he has to try something. Now, he actually hasn't been trained in exorcism either. But he is willing to try and help the boy. And so he begins with an Our Father. You know, that's like the prelude to an official rite of exorcism. And Father Bishop is there to observe what happens and to record those details in writing, which is why we have this narrative today.
Yeah.
Now, what many may not know, and I didn't know that until I researched this, is that the Vatican has a special training course in the rites of exorcism. Prior to 2019, it was just for people in the church. But in 2019, they opened up that training course to other denominations.
Really?
They did. While they do have official training for it, they don't require it before you perform one.
Okay.
So they start this process. And that first night is a doozy. Father Bodern begins the exorcism prayers. Father Bishop is taking extensive notes on what is happening. As they're praying, Ronald begins to thrash about. Scratches begin to emerge all over his body. They have to bring a 3rd priest in to help restrain him. And he's a younger, stronger man. His name is Walter Halloran.
Okay.
I don't know that he was a priest, but he was in the church and was I don't know what he was studying there.
Yeah.
The boy goes through what looks like a fight. Like he's flailing his fist. He's wallering all over the place. And an image of the devil appears on his leg.
Oh, my goodness.
He's screaming out. And then at times he's singing Old Man River in like this high falsetto voice.
That is so weird.
So weird. The priest asks how many demons are inside. A slash shows up on Ronald's leg and then an X. So they don't know if that means 1 or 10. They don't know. And each time Ronald is scratched, he's doubling over in pain. Finally, after that goes on for quite some time, Ronald settles down and falls asleep. So the priest sprinkle holy water on him to wake him up. They ask him what he saw during the night, and he tells them he fought a huge red slimy devil.
Jeez.
After a long night, around 7:30 that next morning, Ronald does go into a natural sleep and stays asleep until about mid-afternoon. And he seems normal at that point when he wakes up. He eats, he plays a game of Monopoly. He's kind of at a calm state. Also, I want to note that during this exorcism, Father Bowdern only eats bread and drinks water to prepare himself for this spiritual battle. Mm-hmm. And that's what they call a black fast.
Okay.
And he keeps that up until the ordeal is over. And I'm not going to tell you yet how long it takes.
Okay.
So on the third night, Father Bowdern starts his exorcism prayers, just like he's been doing for the past couple of nights. At one point, Ronald barks like a dog and bares his teeth. Now, you mentioned in your episode last week about that girl, that 9-year-old barking like a dog.
I did.
So that did make me wonder, maybe there was something going on there.
Yeah.
Then the priest does ask for a sign that the demon is present, and when he does, Ronald cocks his leg and begins spraying a long stream of urine at him.
Oh my God.
And he taunts the priest with curse words and a lot of vulgar actions. Now, this behavior goes on for weeks. Father Bishop's notes read, Ronald spends the night screaming, barking, singing, urinating, and passing foul air.
Wow.
The rites are taking a toll on the priest, and it is showing up physically. Father Bowdern is looking kind of gaunt from the fast.
I'm sure.
They're all exhausted from trying to restrain him during the nights. And during all of this time, while Ronald's under these evil forces, he has spit on and urinated on the priest. He has attacked them all, like at various times, with hard blows. So they're all exhausted.
Yeah.
So they make the decision to move him to St. Alexian Brothers Hospital, where he can be restrained again. And there is a ward there where he can kind of scream and not be heard.
Okay.
So Ronald, he's really afraid of this. He's extremely fearful, but they do take him. So on the first night, his father joins the team. Now, his father was raised Catholic, and he knows kind of like the rituals of the faith, but he doesn't really currently even practice his faith.
Okay.
So on this night, after the priest have read the rites of exorcism for the 5th time, Ronald, he seems a little calmer. So they've gone through it like 5 times in that night. He gets calmed down. The priests leave. But his father, Ed, stays back with Ronald, and he reads aloud to Ronald from a book of prayers. And that night, Ronald does sleep through the night, the first time that he has done so in months. So the next morning, he's discharged from the hospital.
Okay.
And the very next night, he's back to his fits. The 3 men together can barely restrain him, and he deals a blow to William Halloran that literally shatters his nose.
No.
He teases and taunts the priests about being unable to exorcise the demons. He threatens them. He tells them everybody who wrangles with me will die a terrible death. So they realize things have actually escalated a notch.
Yeah.
So they think, okay, we're going to baptize him. They're going to baptize him into the Catholic faith because they hope that that'll create like the spiritual opposition to the devil inside of him. So they attempt to give him communion, but he has to go to the church for that. And on the way there, there's this voice that says, I will not let Ronald receive Holy Communion. And on the way to the church, he grabs the steering wheel and tries to crash the car. Several days later, the priests notice that he's in a new phase. It seems that the devil has power over Ronald's senses and his personality. So this voice tells them that Ronald's going to wake up and be happy and calm. And he does. He falls asleep, and the voice again tells him now he's going to wake up angry and irritable. And again, that proves to be true. They attempt to give him communion again. And again, that voice says, I will not let Ronald receive Holy Communion.
Mm-mm.
The exorcism has been going on for about 5 weeks now. And finally, Easter comes. Easter morning passes, which is, a great holiday in the Christian faith.
Sure.
And there is a breakthrough. They bring this statue of Michael the Archangel into Ronald's room.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to read from the newspaper article directly from that about some of the things that the priest did on this day. It says, the priest spent 2 months with his young subject. The rite was performed more than once before the youth finally was brought back to normal last April. So this happened April 17th, which was day 31 of them doing this.
Oh, my gosh.
Mm-hmm. At 10:45 p.m. The priests are praying the prayers of exorcism. After a mass, the priest prayed for divine guidance. This was followed by the recitation of psalms, and holy water was sprinkled on the sufferer. They say, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, I cast thee out. It lasted about 45 minutes, and they hear a voice that interrupts the prayers, and it says, very authoritatively, Satan, I am Saint Michael, and I command you, Satan, and the other evil spirits to leave the body in the name of Dominus immediately. Now.
Well, who's Dominus?
That's actually Latin for God.
Oh.
And I only knew that because I taught Latin last year.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
When that voice demands that, Ronald thrashes violently, as he has many times before, but this time it was the worst ever. And then suddenly, he's just calm. And they ask him, what happened? And he says he sees a bright white light and a man with wavy hair wearing a white robe. He's holding a fiery sword and pointing it down into a pit where he can see the devil and his demons. And as he witnesses those demons descending into the pit, he feels a very strong twisting and pulling in his stomach. And then he relaxes, finally.
Wow.
Father Bishop's notes said, it is over. Since Monday at 11 p.m., there have been no indications of the presence of the devil.
Oh, my goodness.
That is crazy. The Hunkeler family returns home to Maryland, where Ronald enters high school. Now, Ronald would grow up to become a NASA engineer.
Really?
Yes, working at the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. He held degrees in chemical engineering and psychology. He helped with the Apollo project that put man on the moon.
Oh, my goodness.
He married, and he had 3 children. He named his firstborn son Michael after the archangel.
Oh, that gives me chills.
Yeah, it sounds like a happy ending, but I actually find it kind of sad. And I'll tell you why later.
Okay.
Because you would think that would really have such an impact on your life.
Yes.
And I'm going to tell you
a
little bit about that in a minute. In the days following the completion of the exorcism, the Washington Post wrote an expose on Ronald's story. They did use a fake name in order to protect his privacy because he was a kid. But there was a student at Georgetown University named William Blatty, and he read those articles, and he was a little bit fascinated with that story. And somehow he got a hold of that diary written by Father Bishop that had detailed the events of the exorcism. And he tried to get an interview and speak to Father Bodern, but he denied. He wouldn't speak with him.
Right.
Skip forward 22 years. It's the early 1970s, and that student, William Blatty, has written a story. It's a supernatural detective story filled with all these spiritual overtones. And in his story, which were based on these newspaper articles that he had read so long ago, he writes about the exorcism of a young girl instead of a young Ronald Hunkeler.
Yes.
He changes the sex of the protagonist and based on that story.
Okay.
The story's the same, and he's sure this book's going to be a bestseller.
Right.
But it is not. It doesn't do that well. Despite doing a book tour, and he got fairly good reviews, the sales are just dismal. He attempts to sell his script to Hollywood, and he gets rejected by every single studio. His agent does arrange for him to get a possible spot on the Dick Cavett show. Remember the Dick Cavett show?
Yes.
And when we did the episode about Fort Bragg?
Yes.
And that he went on that show. So the producer tells him, well, you're probably not going to get a spot, but just stay on call in case. And in some twist of fate, there's a guest that cancels. And so they call Blatty and say, hey, can you come fill this spot? Of course, he jumps at the chance.
Sure.
And once he gets there, as if that wasn't enough, the main guest that night was too drunk to appear on the show. So he ends up kind of being the main guest and gets to spend the entire time promoting his book. And that does the trick.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, his book does reach number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list and stays there for 17 weeks.
Wow.
Now, do you think he was able to sell the movie rights?
Yes.
Yep, you bet he was, for $641,000.
Wow.
And now, as you know, that movie will become The Exorcist. Yeah. Okay, all this time, the real Ronald Hunkeler has managed to stay anonymous. Newspapers accounts would sometimes refer to him as Roland or Robbie because, they don't want to do more damage to him after his ordeal. But now that he's an adult and this book and this movie have all of a sudden come out, he knows it really is only a matter of time before his identity will be discovered.
Right.
And he has not fared well through the years. In spite of that, those degrees and that career and working with NASA, you would think, he's really overcome a lot.
Yeah.
But he hasn't. Somehow his name does get leaked. And of course, curious teenagers, they sometimes show up at his house thinking that's where the exorcism took place, but it's not because that was in his childhood home.
Right.
But he became so paranoid about people finding out who he was and all of that every year on Halloween, he would not stay home. He would go somewhere else thinking that people were going to show up and play pranks and do stuff because they wanted to see the Exorcist house or whatever. I will say this. The newspaper said that some accounts, even to this day, tell about strange and evil happenings at his childhood home where that exorcism did occur.
Wow.
Much like you were talking about the Salem witch trials, how in that area, even today, it's now there's so much witchcraft activity.
Yeah.
There have been horrible murders in the area, almost like if there was actual evil still lurking there. Back to Ronald, he's prone to these rages at home. And it takes a toll on his marriage. So by 1986, his wife has divorced him. 2 of his children are not even on speaking terms with him.
Sad.
It is sad. But he finds a new relationship with a former coworker at NASA. So he and this lady, they buy a house together. He's, an attempt at happiness. But he does not ever really feel like he gets away from his traumatized past. At times, people will approach him saying, "Hey, are you that exorcist boy?" And he denies it, but yeah. So you skip forward some more years. He's now at age 84. Ronald Hunkeler is now on his deathbed.
Right.
Even though he was baptized into the Catholic faith as a boy, he never really practiced the religion afterward. There are no plans for him to have any sort of a religious funeral, and he's about to die.
Wow.
But one day a priest arrives at the home, not invited by anybody.
Yeah.
And seemingly, they don't know how he knew Ronald was even on his deathbed. But Ronald's living girlfriend lets him in, and this priest performs the last rites on Ronald Hunkeler and gave him Holy Communion. And shortly after that, Ronald does die. A year later, his girlfriend speaks to a reporter, and she tells him she doesn't really have any idea how that priest knew how to come to the house, but she believes he got Ron into heaven. She said she believes he's in heaven with God. So, can we talk about that for a minute?
Sure.
This is why I find this very sad. And if you're listeners of us, we don't try to hide our beliefs.
Right.
Okay.
No, not at all.
We're Christian and that's very well known. So there's lots of places in the book of Mark where it talks about demon possession and Jesus casting out those unclean spirits.
Yes.
Right? Well, in Mark chapter 5, Jesus heals this man. He cast a demon out of him.
Yes.
And he tells the man, go and tell his friends how much the Lord has done for you.
Yeah.
And that man does. He goes away proclaiming Jesus to the point that it says they all marveled. And so this man brings glory to God.
Right.
God gets the glory from this.
Yes.
He glorifies Jesus. And I find it sad because in Ronald's account, we don't see that happen.
No.
He continues to try to hide from it, which I can understand why he would want his privacy. But if you've been delivered in such a mighty way, you should give God the glory.
Absolutely.
And he didn't continue to even practice this faith. He was so graciously delivered.
Yes. I know. I was thinking that. Like, I can't imagine. Like, look what the Lord did for him.
Yeah. I find it sad. I mean, I know his girlfriend believes he got into heaven, but the fact is somebody else can't pray you into heaven.
Right.
That is a personal decision. And from all accounts, it does not sound like even on his deathbed, he made that decision on his own.
Right.
So that's why I find it so sad.
It is sad.
This is just something else. I'm thinking, the priest had that recorded in that diary, but they never made it public either. And I know what they're trying to do is not to bring a lot of publicity to it.
Right.
But I almost feel like, but they could have used it to proclaim and glorify the Lord too, publicly, because instead they did keep that under wraps. But if you think about it, but what did happen? Somebody else wrote this story. It's turned into this movie. And who does it ultimately glorify?
Yeah.
It's glorifying the evil side of that.
Yes.
And so, I mean, those were just some observations.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And it could be that they weren't allowed to. I know that priests take very solemn vows. Even like legal stuff, they're not allowed to to give testimony. Like if they are confessed to, they're not allowed to give that information even to the police. So I'm not saying that's
but that's a good point.
But it could be.
That's something definitely to consider, for sure. And that may have just not been wanting. I mean, again, because his family wanted to keep it quiet, they do have an obligation to.
And his parents might have been like, "Don't tell anybody that."
Yeah.
Like we just don't know.
We don't know
how that happened, but it is very sad.
But unfortunately, that guy did get a hold of that book, supposedly from somebody in the priesthood.
Yes.
And it was used in the opposite way.
Yes.
I do want to say that Father William Bodern died in 1993 at the age of 85. Mm. Father Raymond Bishop died in 1978 at the age of 72. And Walter Halloran, the guy who got his nose broken, he lived until 2005. Each man died from natural causes brought on by age and nothing to do, like they were threatened with.
Okay, good.
So here's a question. So do you think that Ronald, when he tried to conjure up Aunt Tilly using that Ouija board, do you think that opened the door for his demon possession?
It sounds like it. I mean, it sounds like it to me.
I think so too.
Yeah, it definitely. And I do believe that there's a reason why those things are forbidden.
Right. I mean, and that's why our mamas didn't want us playing with it,
exactly,
right?
Yes.
And going back to your episode last week of the Salem witch trials, which was the whole bulk of that book we got these stories from, perhaps there was that element of, I feel like those girls were kind of playing an innocent game, but maybe the superstition that these people held itself allowed some of that in.
Yes, absolutely. I do believe that, because even the Christians themselves were superstitious. You know what I mean? Like even
yeah. Well, when I was doing this, I mean, and I really do, I feel like him playing with that Ouija board did open him up to that for sure. But I listened to one of Allie Beth Stuckey's podcast episodes on Relatable.
Yes.
It was her.
I love her.
I do too. It was her August the 27th interview. My friend Juanita, actually, who heard about Allie Beth from us on the podcast.
Oh, wow.
She listened to that episode and then sent me a link to it. And so then I listened to it. And it's an interview she does with this young lady named Jack Marino Chin, who was in the occult, really, and into witchcraft. She has a great testimony. So I'll put a link to that in our show notes. But I encourage you to go listen to it. But even she talks about, letting that into.
I was worried about for years after I played with that Ouija board for that little bit of time. Yeah. Like for years, I mean, it was almost like a fearful thing. Like, I really was afraid of that.
I think it would do us well to be cautious about what kind of things we are allowing into our children's lives. But at the same time, not being spooked by everything and afraid. Because as a Christian, with Christ and the Holy Spirit inside of us, we don't have to be more afraid of Satan than we are, of
God. Or
yes.
Yeah, like he's more powerful.
Right. God's definitely more powerful. That's also another thing I was thinking when I was reading this. Like, when you hear good versus evil and you think of God versus Satan, and it's not, we forget that Satan's only as powerful. He was an angel. Yeah. He's only as powerful as Michael the
not-
archangel or
yeah.
any of these other angels.
Yes.
He's not on level with God.
Mm-mm.
And so anyway, that was a short version of that story.
I did not know that story, so that's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. So we do have scriptures warning us, and we would do well to heed those.
Absolutely. Wow, those were some hard times.
Yes, they were.
Let no one be found among you who sacrifices their son or daughter in the fire, who practices divination or sorcery, interprets omens, engages in witchcraft, or casts spells, or who is a medium or a spiritist, or who consults the dead. Anyone who does these things is detestable to the Lord. Deuteronomy 18:10-12. Till next time, goodbye.